powers rap. Legislature, executive, judiciary in the mix. Three-way split, that's how Ireland gets its fix. Balancing powers so no one gets too tall. Checks and balances, keep fairness for all.
Hello folks, my name is Declan O'Luder QC. I'm standing in for Neil, as he is on a well-deserved break. Today we are going to talk about a clever government system of checks and balances, known as the Doctrine of the Separation of Powers. So, a quick history of the doctrine. The Greeks and Romans both used government systems that divided functions of rule among different bodies in order to avoid tyranny. For example, that most hipster of wise men, Aristotle, distinguished deliberative, magisterial, by which he meant the executive, and judicial elements of a constitution, while the Roman Republic distributed authority among consuls, senate, and popular assemblies in a kind of mixed government. These divisions were not always successful, as the autocracy of Julius Caesar and various other emperors illustrated. In the late 17th century, John Locke gave one of the first clear modern formulations by distinguishing legislative, executive, and federative, by which he meant foreign affairs, powers in his second treatise of government, where legislative power, derived from the people, should be supreme, but that lawmaking and law-executing functions must not be held in the same hands, because combining them invited arbitrary government. But the dude who really gave the doctrine its polish was Charles Louis de Montesquieu with his The Spirit of the Laws, in which he claimed that liberty is best protected when three governmental functions, legislative, executive, and judicial, are allocated to distinct bodies able to check one another. Montesquieu's tripartite scheme refined earlier theories and practices by treating the judiciary as a separate power and by emphasizing mutual checks and balances, turning an older mixed government tradition into a more precise constitutional doctrine. The Constitution of Ireland divides power among the Oireachtas, Legislature, the government made up of the Taoiseach and Cabinet, executive, and the courts, judiciary, and sets out their core functions in separate chapters. Legislative power is vested solely and exclusively in the Oireachtas. This means that the legislature makes the law. This is set out in Articles 15 to 27 of the Constitution. Article 28 says that executive power shall be exercised by or on the authority of the government. This means that the executive carries out the law. And Articles 34 to 37 make it clear that judicial power is vested in courts established under the Constitution. This means that the judiciary interprets the law. The Supreme Court has the final say in the interpretation of the Constitution of Ireland. It ensures that the laws enacted by the Oireachtas, which is Ireland's Parliament, are upheld and interpreted in light of the Constitution and the jurisprudence that has developed since it came into force in 1937. In that way, it may be said to function as a constitutional court. This is a role of particular importance in Ireland as the Constitution expressly permits the courts to review any law, whether passed before or after the enactment of the Constitution, in order to determine whether it conforms with the Constitution. The superior courts, namely the High Court, the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court, retain the power to declare as invalid any legislation that is determined to be inconsistent with the Constitution. Although there is no single article in the Constitution labeled separation of powers, the Supreme Court has repeatedly treated this tripartite allocation and the overall structure of the Constitution as a product of the separation of powers doctrine. Irish courts have developed the doctrine mainly through constitutional litigation about whether one branch has done more or gone further than the Constitution allows it to do, or whether it has hijacked the function of one of the other branches. This would be dealt with under the broad category of ultra vires. In TD versus Minister for Education, the Supreme Court overturned a number of mandatory injunctions granted by the High Court against the government to build sufficient and adequate centres for children with challenging behaviours, and emphasised that courts cannot assume the executive's policymaking and resource allocation role, as this was judicial intrusion into executive discretion, or to put it more simply, judges getting involved in politics. However, An influential minority judgment raised the scenario where courts might be justified in entering what was traditionally a political sphere where it involved the enforcement of constitutional rights even at the cost of some overlap, illustrating a tension between rigid formalism and a more rights-oriented, functional approach. Commentators have interpreted the TD judgment as a microcosm of competing philosophies of separation of powers in Ireland and as a high-water mark of judicial restraint vis-à-vis the executive, some labelling it their death knell for the enforceability of social rights in Ireland. The Irish version of separation of powers operates alongside a Westminster-style fusion of legislature and executive, because the government must retain the confidence of the legislature but at the same time ministers are members of the Oireachtas. This leads to what commentators describe as a partially functionalist model. There is some overlap in personnel and functions, but this is seen as acceptable provided that core constitutional roles, especially adjudication and lawmaking, remain within their proper constitutional homes. Judicial review of both legislation and executive action is the central check on the other branches, while mechanisms such as presidential referral of bills to the Supreme Court and Oireachtas oversight of the government provide further constitutional controls. Okay, so this has been very interesting, but what does it mean in everyday language? Ireland's separation of powers means that the main responsibilities of running the country are shared between three groups: those who make the laws, those who carry them out, and those who interpret the law and make decisions when there are disputes based on their interpretation of the law. Each branch has its own job, like parts of a machine, so that no one group has too much power. So what are these three branches in Ireland? The Legislature, this is the Oireachtas, which includes the Dáil, main parliament, elected by the people, Seanad, Senate, and the President. Their core job is to make new laws. The Executive, this is the government, made up of the Taoiseach, which is the name of the Prime Minister in Ireland, and Cabinet Ministers. They are responsible for putting laws into action and handling the daily work of running the country, such as policing, education, and healthcare. The Judiciary, these are the courts and judges. Their role is to interpret the law and settle disagreements about what laws mean or whether someone has broken the law. And how does it work? Each branch has different rights and duties. One writes the laws, one enforces them, and one interprets them. This setup means they keep an eye on each other, so it's hard for one group to control everything. For example, while the government proposes many laws, the Parliament must debate and pass them, and anyone can ask the courts to check if a law is fair or allowed by the Constitution. Here are three examples where one branch checks up on another branch. The Oireachtas can change a law if court decisions show that the old version is causing problems or going beyond what was intended. The government controls when to bring most new bills forward and can decide not to introduce certain laws that some TDs or senators want. The courts can decide that a law passed by the Oireachtas goes against the Constitution, and then that law can no longer be used. So now you know, the foundation of our democracy is to spread the power around, and then let those three organs of government protect their turf from the others, all the while watched by that most important fourth element, the people. I'm Declan O'Lular QC, and this has been The Law is My Oyster.
Yeah, separation of powers rap. Legislature, executive, judiciary in the mix. Three-way split, that's how Ireland gets its fix. Balancing powers so no one gets too tall. Checks and balances, keep fairness for all. Step into the dialogue, makers on the case. Sean Adam, president, setting up the pace. Writing every rule so the land can be run. New laws, old laws, making sure it's done. Power seats in the cabinet, put plans into the street. Running public services, keeping Ireland sweet. From schools to healthcare, they handle every chore. But the Parliament debates before opening the door. Judiciary in session, keeping rights to the fore. Sorting out the meaning, laying down the law. Settle every issue, check if laws are fair. Stopping the others if they step out of their lair. Legislature, executive, judiciary in the mix. Three-way split, that's how Ireland gets its fix. so no one gets too tall. Checks and balances, keep fairness for all. Legislature, executive, judiciary in the mix. Three-way split, that's how Ireland gets its fix. Balancing power so no one gets too tall. Checks and balances, keep fairness for all.